But yeah, I think it's all of those feelings all at once. In a way, to me, this episode is pushing the boundary more than any other one on some of these dimensions, just because of the nature of the topic.
Most men don't have those spaces. Most men have no place to really expose themselves from their heart, like expose their heart to the places where they are trying to live a fulfilling erotic life. Everyone with a heartbeat wants to have that. And for men, there's a lot going against them. And I'll start by saying that part of the problem is that men are hurting. It feels to me like the start of the issue, where why men are hurting, there's all sorts of individual and personal family constellation issues, whether it's big issues of trauma or just ways that boys and men don't feel safe to be full humans. There's, the social conditioning that boys, it starts as really young boys who don't get to have their emotional expression, are either told deliberately or are symbiotically see the fact that they are not going to be validated as a man or as respectable or as worthy if you express these characteristics of tenderness, of emotionality, reaching for closeness. These things are essentially stripped away from boys and young men. And by the time we become leaning into our sexual lives, looking for erotic connection, our own self-attunement is deeply disturbed. Our connection to our own emotions and our emotional literacy of how we can communicate with partners, how we can bridge a real deep trust and get the healthy consent that we want to have connective and enjoyable experiences with others. These mature human qualities are relegated to anyone that's not a boy or a man. Like, other people get to have those human experiences validated as pure, as sacred, as natural, and men are stripped of that. And that's, to me, what feels like the first abuse that happens. And then from there, from that hurt place, from that constricted, oppressed place, boys and men hurt others, and they hurt others in big ways, where male sexuality has been heavily demonized. Male voices are oftentimes silenced. Men's experiences is oftentimes, for right reason, men's voices are become tiresome in the conversation. There's a big ask for men to listen and for men to lean back and let the voices of others come through. And I agree with that. And there needs to be a new way, a new story about the way that men believe about their own erotic energy, around their own life force.
Just to make sure I'm tracking, right? I think what I heard is there's this problem, right? And it's kind of become a trope, right? This hurt people, right? And this idea that where it's starting, or maybe not exactly starting, but part of the origin is that young boys are not given this space, right? To define what that healthy relationship with erotic energy looks like, among other, I'm sure, other qualities, right? Of being a boy or being a man in society. And the part that I think struck me the most is that even the most sacred spaces, at least that you've experienced anecdotally, don't necessarily create the space to have that conversation. That was fascinating to me, that, hey, what we're trying to do here is have that conversation. And, we all acknowledge kind of at the beginning, or at least Gabe and I did, that this is an unusual conversation. Both Gabe and I are in circles, coaches, as practitioners, that really try to facilitate self-understanding, self-expression, dialogue, community around personal growth. And yet still, this was some outside of what was what's clearly within that. And that's striking to me, right? And I think this idea that the hegemonic definition of masculinity, right? It's not like a 21st century thing, right? Maybe now we're starting to have this dialogue, but this is a centuries, millennia old societal dynamic, right? Or societal construct. And yes, there are differences across cultures. And yes, there are a handful of matriarchal cultures that maybe operate very differently or whatever. But it's by and large pretty consistent. And maybe we have to define what we're talking about here, but it feels like this idea of the man box of masculinity is an age-old problem.
Masks can look like, emotional stoicism, It can look like toughness. It can look like not expressing fear or pain. It can be the kind of do it all on your own and never ask for help story. I feel like that story continues. Men are really not allowed to ask for help. It's a sign of vulnerability. I say these things, they seem, now I'm 38 years old. These seem silly. They seem inhumane to try to live into these ways. And for me, there was this liberation of what if I just forgot about that story for a minute and reached out for the help I needed or exposed myself. There's deep healing that I experience by admitting fault, admitting that I don't know how to do this, admitting that I'm confused, admitting that I'm scared of what I'm about to try. And a lot of my own sense of self-love comes from witnessing my own courage in life, witnessing myself stepping through the fear and doing the thing that I want to do. And for men, so it takes a lot of courage to speak vulnerably and honestly about what's happening in our inner lives, and not just to our partners. A lot of the framing of what I've been looking at as a cis heterosexual man comes from a heterosexual frame. But I'll say also there's kind of these caricatures of masculinity, what it means to be powerful. Either you're physically strong, either you're successful in this sexual conquest with women, or you attain certain power and respect, whether it's you have a lot of money, or you're in a position of power. There's others, but those are ways that are like obvious, blunt positions of respect that men are often seeking to get one or all of those pieces to validate themselves. And this validation, this like brick building is, in my experience, made of straw. It just gets blown away so easily. And a solid foundation of self-respect comes from different behaviors and different accomplishments.
The first being this juxtaposition that what you just shared, that cis hetero men need support. This is the group that is the privileged group. You mentioned the Me Too movement earlier. This is the group that is the problem. This is who is creating abuse in the world. This is also, if we start expanding it out, this is the group that's created industrialization, created capitalism, is leading the exploitation and destruction of the world. They are the problem. They're the devil. And here I'm hearing you say something the exact opposite, which is that they need support. Actually, they are human. This is obvious, right? But it's something that I think, as you said, a lot of the understandable and necessary elements of the conversation that are happening in our society, this component is often going missing. On the one hand, we're kind of talking out of both ends of our mouth as a culture. It's like, on the one hand, we're vilifying and demonizing sexually violent men, but at the same time, we are celebrating these character traits that go hand in hand with those qualities. I mean, you mentioned for women, people who are female identified, I think there's a similar dynamic with beauty. We all talk about how it's this terrible thing. Barbie movie is out right now, offering that commentary on that it's not what that's all about. This is a terrible thing. But then we totally celebrate beautiful women and marginalize women that we don't think are as attractive. And so I think there's a similar dynamic going on here. And so, yeah, I guess that most of that's color.
One is, there's a lot of like what men shouldn't do. Like, stop it. Stop allowing, there's a thing called bystander training, where it's happening on college campuses. If you're seeing your friends start to harass a woman, or God forbid, actually engage in sexual assault, to step in. How do you do that in a way? It takes a lot of courage up against the like bros before hoes culture. I say this like almost like air quoting, but it's like there's something that I feel pain in my body when I say this. These are really gruesome normalcies that are like in boy culture, right? So, gosh, what a low bar it is to reach out to your friend who's harassing or abusing his girlfriend, or a girl that he's approaching that evening or whatever, and saying, hey, something's off here. For me, there's been too much repression for men and their emotional lives. So there's an importance for men to recover the capacity to feel and to know how to identify that. What that allows them is opportunities to choose wisely and discern, offer discernment to how they share themselves in a truthful way. How that comes off is trustable. If you can name how you're feeling, hey, I'm really turned on right now, or I'm really excited right now, or I have this desire, to know what you want, know how you feel, be able to communicate that, that's trustable. Both for yourself, like just to be able to recognize there's emotions that men are so pressured to not experience, not express, that they don't even have the feeling anymore. I would just say, like, take stock of where you're at right now, and how can we build more self-trust into our life right now. And what that's going to do for me is I'm going to be able to respect myself more tomorrow after I have that conversation. And from that greater self-respect and honoring myself for the courage it took to own that, take responsibility for that action, I can make new choices. So that feels like a great starting point. I would also say, specifically around eroticism, a lot of times, both from exposure to porn, from the ways that, we're kind of taught to be dogs on pursuit of sex, be available for sex whenever we want, supposed to perform a certain way, last as long as we can, that sex is entirely, the sexual encounter ends when men orgasm. All of these things kind of shape our ideas of what it means to have a successful, fulfilling, erotic moment. It's like one step back around what happens in our bodies when we get turned on. So a lot of times, I'll just be real honest, the ways that I will masturbate in my life, it's rarely because I'm so turned on, I want to have sex, that I need to masturbate. I'm actually frustrated, or I'm anxious, or I just feel tense. Like I have to do something that I don't want to do, and I'm annoyed about it. And so there's tension. It's like this tension release valve that oftentimes men turn to. There is other ways that men need to incorporate embodiment practices outside of self-pleasure, of how to like you said, self-regulate. That was actually the word I was looking for earlier. How do we self-regulate ourselves in other ways beyond ejaculation? I could list off exercise and qigong and breath work and this and that. I want to invite men to find the ways that they can build up practices of self-regulation. Some of that is relationships with other men. Some of that's just if it's a family member, if it's a best friend, if it's a mentor, if it's your partner. Ideally not leaning too heavily on your partner, but find those people that you can actually find self-regulation with. But for me, it's a wider experience of emotional self-regulation, physical embodiment, kind of all in the spirit of showing up aligned with ourselves, showing up in a way where we feel that we can respect ourselves and respect others, that we can be on purpose in our lives, that we can go after the things that are really important. And hopefully, for me, that looks like humility. It looks like allyship. It looks like respect. It looks like service.